you go to the next slide. You go advance the slide one, please. Thank you. So generally speaking, I think we're doing okay in terms of developing long-distance transmission lines. Given the currently expected demand for renewables and their location, which is, again, that we're locating those fairly close to load centers, not across the interconnection. Where we're not doing well is in lowering the cost of integrating this variable generation into a reliable power grid. To understand the challenge, you need to throw out the old paradigm, which is represented by the pyramid on the upper left. In that old paradigm, we had base load plants like coal and nuclear plants. Those are the ones in red, operated nearly all the time. We had intermediate load plants in yellow, operated some of the time, and then we had some peaking plants in blue. These are usually expensive plants to operate, and they only operated when demand was really high due to the hottest summer day or the coldest winter day. The pyramid on the right is a better way to think about our power system today and particularly into the future, where the green represents variable wind and solar generation. Once you've made the decision of what generation to build, now you're down to how do you operate it. And the cheapest resources on the system then are those that don't have any fuel cost, which are essentially renewables. So the appropriate way to operate the grid is to shape the rest of your portfolio of generation around the variability of those zero marginal cost resources. So the most valuable generation going forward is going to be that which is flexible. Hydro plants can be flexible, except when they're faced with operating restrictions to protect fish or beaches or environmental values. Gas-fired generation can be flexible or it can be inflexible. In the past 15 years, we've built a lot of high efficiency but not flexible gas generation. They have operating characteristics that look a lot more like coal plants or nuclear plants, and we don't need any more of those. What we need are gas plants that are capable of ramping to accommodate the variability in the overall load in generation portfolio. Where we need more, we also need a lot more institutional flexibility in the West. So unlike other regions, we haven't developed that institutional flexibility needed to integrate variable generation at lower cost to consumers. We have a grid that's balkanized into 38 separate balancing authorities. That's the map shown on the right. This is far more than any other region. Balancing authorities are those entities that are required to match the load and generation on a minute-to-minute basis. This balkanized grid approach to operating the system is becoming increasingly costly as we add more wind and solar, because the variability of now load plus the variability of wind plus the variability of solar, when you take that into account in a small geographic area, which is what's largely represented in those 38 balancing authorities, it's really hard to do. Each balancing authority is facing a curve that looks like this. They're meeting that variability by dispatching the generation typically just within their little area. The net result is higher costs to consumers because the system operators have to maintain a lot of generation on standby to meet that variability. Now, if you aggregated that variability across many of these balancing authorities, the overall variability goes down. The challenge of integrating the rest of the system around that lower level of variability is less, and it saves consumers money. So the answer to our integration challenge is to develop a more flexible regional power system. The chart in the lower right illustrates the general cost of measures to increase flexibility. The lowest cost measures start with improving wind and solar forecasting and establishing intra-hour energy markets, followed by curtailing wind or solar. It's not a great practice because it's essentially wasting free electricity. Followed by more flexible gas generation and storage, which is still an expensive proposition. Go to the next slide. I think this is my, now I got 2 more. So there's 9 ways that you can go about trying to improve system flexibility. And this is in a report done for the Western Governors Association. You can put these in basically 4 buckets. One is improved institutional flexibility. That's things like faster energy markets with shorter intervals for scheduling transmission, balancing resources over a broad area rather than in each of those 38 balancing authorities, and better forecasting of wind and solar, and making better net results make better use of the existing wires. The second bucket is to increase the flexibility of the generating fleet. We're moving that direction with more flexible natural gas plants. A third bucket, which we really haven't explored much at all in the West, is try to use demand response to accommodate unanticipated large ramps that are necessary to keep the lights on. Let's say the wind dies, and wind doesn't die, by the way, instantaneously. It goes down over time, but should you have a big event, and you could call upon demand to help you accommodate that decline in production or the increase in production, it would be a cost saver. And finally, energy storage, which I mentioned is fairly expensive today anyway. So again, I think we're doing okay in terms of building long transmission for renewables, largely because utilities are finding enough in their backyards that they don't need to do long transmission. But where we're failing is in lowering the cost of integrating a variable generation. So go to the last slide. There are a lot of opportunities to apply advanced transmission technologies in the operation of the existing grid. One area where we are making progress in the West is the deployment of something called synchrophasers. These are very precise devices that make very precise measurements 30 times a second on the condition of the grid. This is the foundation for better reliability, for making greater transfers on existing wires. Now there's a problem with sort of all new technologies, and it's sort of the grid-wide technologies, and that's the, in economist terms, the tragedy of the commons, where the company making the investment cannot capture all the benefits of that investment. And as a result, we are probably underinvesting in new technologies in the Western interconnection. Also, with deference, to Pacific Corp, utilities are typically regulated monopolies. They don't have the same kind of financial incentive that a group like Apple does to innovate or die. So to recap, my points are that to make better use of the existing grid and save consumers money, we need to improve reliability, lower the cost of integrating variable generation, and embrace new technologies. With that, I'll pass it on now to Tim.
Thank you, Doug. Our next speaker